here today at the home of Dr. Irwin Suchoff to spend a little time with him as the next in the sequence of the Heritage series. Irwin, thank you for having us into your home today. I'd like to just ask you a little bit about your career, your very distinguished optometric career. Give me a little bit, how did you first get interested in optometry as a profession?
I had a course in college, and it was a psychology course. And I remember that in going into vision, that you had the eye and you had the arrow coming in. And I'm saying to myself after a while, yeah, I understand about what's happening, gets back to the optic nerve and does something, but how come I see something out there when the only arrow was coming in here? And so I went up to the graduate assistant and said to him, how come? And he said to me, that's a dumb question. And so I wanted to know. And it started in did a little bit of independent study. But again, too, we're talking about the 50s when I was in college. And there wasn't a lot, you couldn't get information like you can today.
Where was that college?
It was NYU, New York University. It was University Heights, which was different from the downtown campus. Mine was an all-men's school in the Bronx. Mm-hmm. And so, that's kind of how it started. And I broke my father's heart because he wanted me to become a dentist. Mm-hmm. And I did get into dental school. But you had to go ahead at that time and carve. You got a cake of ivory soap, and they asked you to carve something. And I started doing that kind of stuff after I got in. And I said, this is not something I think I'm going to like. And so I decided upon, getting done with college and then going into optometry school.
Mm-hmm. So where did you go to optometry school?
Well, I took a stop in between. It was the end of the Korean War had ended, but I knew I could get the Korean Bill of Rights to go to optometry school. And so I did go to Columbia for a little while, but decided not to continue.
When was that?
That after I finished college.
Okay.
It didn't work out. I had tried to go to too much school in too little time, and that didn't work out. And then again, too, what I saw about going into the Army at that time, I would get the GI benefits, the schooling as a Korean vet, although the war was over, and I never got to Korea either. Mm-hmm. So went into the Army. Interestingly, because, it started this way. My father was a pharmacist. Mm-hmm. So what they did was, after basic training, medical basic, they went ahead and said to me, okay, we're going to make you a pharmacist, on the basis of my father being a pharmacist. Right. So I ended up at a little station hospital in France, and that was the Red Ball Express. That the supplies came in to the coast of France, and then we were the stopover for the trucks on the way to Germany, etc. Again, too, there was no war. But what happened
was this supplying Berlin?
Oh yeah, all of Germany, all of France, when we had our forces there. Mm-hmm. And so I was pharmacist. And so that's how it was. And I had to go down to a place called La Rochelle, which was a general hospital, to get drugs, pharmaceutical things. And they had an eye clinic. And I knew I wanted to go into optometry at that point. Mm-hmm. And who was the optometrist? Lieutenant Norman Halfman.
Oh.
So that's how he and I met. Talked to him, and I said, I want to become an optometrist. What do I need to do? And he went on and on and on. And I got out of the Army.
What, was he already an optometrist?
Oh, yeah, he was a second lieutenant. Okay. That's a whole other story, how, well, I don't know if it's, but what happened was, there was a bill passed that optometrists had to be commissioned. But they weren't doing it. So Norman Halfman gets drafted. And what happens is, he tells his mother, who was a rabble-rouser, that, hey, they didn't commission me. She goes into Jacob Javits, Senator Jacob Javits' office, and what happens? all of a sudden they come to Norman at the basic training and say to him, "Well, you're going to be commissioned." Well, there were a lot of other optometrists in his basic training. He said, "Oh, good, we'll all do that." They said, "No, only you." He said, "Oh, no, you're not going to make an example out of me." So he was a big factor in getting optometrists commissioned at that time. But in any case, I got done with optometry school. I went to then the Massachusetts College of Optometry.
Okay.
I got the bachelor's degree in '59 and the OD degree in '60.
So they were giving an OD degree at
Yes.
that point.
Yeah, I think we might have been the second class or something like that who did that. And from there, went into practice with Dick Kavner. We bought Harold Solon's practice in the Bronx.
In New York.
In
the
New
city.
York, in the city, in the Bronx.
Right.
And from there, got an invitation to come on the staff of the Optometric Center.
Could you describe the practice a little bit, the office, what kind of things you did?
We were a ground floor apartment on the Grand Concourse, which was one of the elite places in the Bronx, the Champs-Élysées of the Bronx. And it was a ground floor office. You walked in, there was a reception area. There was a big refracting room. There was an even bigger room for vision therapy. And essentially, that was it. At the beginning, Harold had been doing dispensing, and we did, but we stopped after about a year. And we decided we were just going to do optometry, which was a courageous thing to do.
So you mentioned that there already was room for vision therapy, and where did the interest in that part of it? Because that's a long way from the arrow goes in and this type of thing. But what was the seed? What was the thing, the changer that shifted you in the direction of, I want to look at doing vision therapy? And then how'd you link up with Kavner and Harold? Because already I can see the ideas and the thoughts are already in that direction.
In optometry school, I got very interested in vision therapy. Started saying, well, refraction is really nice. And you couldn't do too much with ocular disease in those days.
Right.
But you did a little bit. But there was a clinic and there was a teacher who was pretty good, Mitch Kuhn. And I kind of hooked up with him and just started doing it. The other thing, I always loved kids. I liked treating kids, and the clinic at that point, there was a lot of kids, and I knew I could communicate with them. So that's pretty much what happened. And Dick and I were good friends. As a matter of fact, as I recall, Dick was a dance instructor at Arthur Murray's studio, putting himself through. And he was called Cha-Cha Cabinet in those days.
I had no idea.
And what happened was, like, a couple of times, somebody got sick. And he called me and said, "Would you come down and be a dance instructor with me?" And I did. But we got pretty close. And when we came out of school, I was employed by an optometrist in Jamaica, New York. Dick was employed by someone in Brooklyn. But we kept in touch. He had come on to the staff of the Optometric Center. I had a kid at that point, so, financially I had to be a little more productive than he wasn't married at that time. And essentially, what happened was, he said to me at one point, "There's a good practice in the Bronx. It's Harold Solon." And I had heard of Harold, and I heard about him. And he said, "It's really a VT practice. It's a very good VT practice. You want to go and take a look at it?" So he said, "Yeah." So it was a Sunday morning, and Dick and I went there, and Harold was there in his lankiness, sitting there like this, charming. And essentially we talked, and he asked us, it's very, very open on the parts of the three of us. "Why do you want to do this?" And we told him. And I said, "Why do you want to sell the practice?" And he told us he wanted to just go do what he was doing in New Jersey. And Dick and I looked at each other. He gave us a number. And Dick and I looked at each other, and there was that spark. We said, we'll take it. And Hal said, really?
Yeah.
I said, yeah, we'll take it. We want to buy this practice. As we were leaving, somebody rang the bell and opened the door. It's Hal Friedman.
Mm.
And Hal wanted to buy that practice too. But we got there at 9 o'clock. He got there at 10 o'clock. And so that was kind of how we got into doing that. And we kept Harold for a while.
Mm-hmm.
We just felt we needed Harold to be there. Harold taught both of us how to run a practice, quite frankly. It's stuff that you don't learn in school. You know, how do you really do this? He taught us a different way to do VT. Very goal-oriented. We had the troposcope. We had all the equipment there that you could have in a VT practice. I mean, today it would be absolutely nothing. But essentially, we made a go of it.
So how long did you and Dick work together in that practice?
About 12 years. And what happened was the neighborhood started changing.
Yeah.
And there was a dentist right next to us. And one day, we used to do this. We'd go to lunch and take our secretary with us to lunch and leave the door open.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then one day we came in and the typewriter was missing. And we started looking and there were some other things missing. So we started locking the door. Then what happened, I was in the office and it was like the early afternoon. And the secretary from the dentist next door came running in, hysterical. Somebody had come in the office to get drugs and money and beat the hell out of the dentist. And, when we saw that, we did what we could for the dentist. And it's at that moment. But Dick looked at me, I looked at Dick, and we said, we're getting out of here.
Yeah.
And what we did was...
This was about 1972-ish now?
I would say about 19... I think the year before the college came into existence,
right.
So 71.
Started in 73, I think we...
Well, 71, I think the college started. Give or take.
Yeah, give or take a year or two.
Whatever.
I thought the first incoming class was 73, and I was in the class of 75, and I was the third class.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I think we started. I think we started the college.
The business, right? The business of the college started well
in
before.
71.
right.
Yeah,
I got it.
It started, and there was planning on all this, and getting the class, admission, that kind of stuff. And so what we did was we couldn't decide what we wanted to do. Dick wanted to have an office in Manhattan. I wasn't crazy about that. We were living in Westchester County, very northern Westchester County. And so Dick went ahead and rented an office. What I did was I increased the time at the college. It started at one day, had been in the optometric center one day a week.
Right. During the 12 years, were you involved in the Optometric Center of New York?
The whole time.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit
Oh,
about that?
love to.
And what you... Yeah.
Love to. It was a magic time. Columbia had stopped its optometry school. And then you had some people from Columbia who said, wow, we got to have some kind of optometric presence educationally here. And so they started the Optometric Center in New York. And there was Ernie Giglio. There was a guy named Finkelstein who was one of the administrators. And then they hired Norman Hafner when he got out of the Army. He became the executive director. And so he came on. What Norman did was, it was a very tight-knit group. There was Norman and two other young people from who had just graduated from the Pennsylvania College of Optometry, Norman's alma mater, and they were the administrators. And then essentially what happened was you got an invitation to come on, and it was like an honor. There's no question. It was a big honor. And it were the average person coming on, the Giglios and the older group. Harold Solon was there too for a little while. Yeah, it was a magic time, as I said. And I talked a little bit about what it was in terms of the administrators. But there was young guys coming in. We were all in our late 20s, early 30s. We were all in full-time private practice. And you'd come to the optometric center 1 day or 2 days a week, okay? I came 1 day.
What was your day?
Thursday.
Okay. My father was Wednesday.
Yeah, I remember your father.
It was a Wednesday,
the only time we saw other guys were like if you had a big meeting of the staff. But I knew your father, and there were people around from other things. You went and you did primary care at one point at the beginning. I can't really recall exactly what, but you did the primary care clinic, and you did it for the morning usually. There's other guys did it. They came and did it in the afternoon, and then I always did the afternoon and evening in VT with Marty Birnbaum.
Fantastic.
That was a fantastic. Marty and I worked together all those years, and it was very interesting. In this respect, he went to PCO, and I went to New England. At PCO, it was strictly a
good way to describe it.
Yeah, hold on. It was a very classical type of optometry, graphical analysis.
Right.
That was the key. At New England, there was the guy who taught optometry, who was the dean, Ralph Green. He didn't teach Skeffington, and he didn't teach graphical analysis. Came out of school. I didn't know how to do. I had never done a checking and chaining, and I had never done a graphical analysis. Marty had. Marty, at that time, was strictly graphical analysis. And the interesting thing was, we talked about it, and I said, okay, you go ahead and you show me your exam, last exam, and just show me the findings. And he said, okay. And then we sat down and looked at it, and I said, okay, here's what I think. Here's a diagnosis, and here's what I would do. And I looked, and it was exactly the same thing.
Right.
And we both realized that somehow, the thing that I learned was a syndrome type of optometry. There was a toxic syndrome.
Yeah. Or the A-type case.
Well, yeah.
You didn't know it was called the A-type case.
There was none of that.
Yeah.
But the point, as a matter of fact, I remember this. Somebody came, and I don't remember who, from the Boston area, and lectured. And the person talked in a language that no one in my class understood. And I think that was a big thing. That was a hindrance to many, many people. You didn't talk accommodation and convergence. You talked about centering and identification, which later on I understood the beauty of that.
Yeah.
That vergence and accommodation are the mechanical parts of what Skeffington called, which were the cognitive parts. And trying to get that across over the years to people, I think it began to make sense. It made sense, essentially, when you started talking about the dorsal and ventral streams.
Right.
Then it really all came together pretty nicely.
So you're at the optometric center as well as in practice.
Oh, and other places too.
Okay.
St. Joseph's School for the Deaf, doing perceptual examinations and training.
So you brought up this time working, where was it, with the children?
St. Joseph's School for the Deaf.
So in the heritage of the profession, there are the times Jerry Getman talked about working with the cerebral palsy population, and others talked about working with these populations and gaining insight into the visual process from that that could not have been gotten by our profession pretty much any other way. Could you comment a little bit about your experience?
Well, I'm glad it's a very interesting thing that you brought up. The guy, and I don't remember his name, I'm old, I forget these names, but who was the Commissioner of Health in New York City, happened to be a good friend of Norman's. And he would come to the optometric center when we would have a meeting, staff meeting, and he would talk. And what he said was, he was a very perceptive man. He knew about optometry. And he said, the reason optometry is going to win is because you hit the soft underbelly of ophthalmology. You guys go to the places where ophthalmology does not want to go. We were at the United Cerebral Palsy. We were all over these places, and they welcomed us with open arms. They absolutely welcomed us with open arms. And so, you could, I always said this, that my patients taught me more than I learned in school. I mean, I had the basis of school, but my patients, particularly the special populations, really, really taught me about vision. Because you saw it at a different level. I got very interested. I'd say the last 15 years before I retired was devoted completely to head trauma. I founded the head trauma rehabilitation unit at the college. And essentially it started, let's put it this. My son had a teacher, art teacher. And this is while I was practicing. And by the way, I always practiced. Even when I was at the college, I was practicing in Westchester 1 to 2 days a week. Okay? It was a Saturday and sometimes 2 evenings on other ones. I worked. I was a workaholic.
I think some of us students, for the audience, I was a student of Irwin's and enjoyed that. And I have some questions I'm going to want to ask about some of actually what you taught. I want to see if I'm kidding a little bit, but I just got to get those notes straight. But
eventually.
But I don't think any of us had any idea that you were actually still working outside. So yeah. We knew lots of the professors who would come in 1 or 2 days, but to us, you were a full-time, always there.
I went the other way, okay?
Yeah.
There were people who, at the end of their career, would come into optometric education. I went at the beginning of my career. Right. After 10, 12 years of full-time practice, I went into optometric education. But I had a patient base in Westchester practice, and I was there either one to, I would say 2 days. But I started cutting back, and eventually it was 1 day. But even at a time when I was dean for the professional program, biggest mistake in my life, becoming a dean, was the most frustrating time, because all you're dealing with are frustrated students or frustrated faculty. Right. Not very positive.
So during that, again, that sort of 12-year lead up to coming, again, involved in this, but coming into the school, that was also around the time that the Gesell Institute was really starting to ramp up some of its education and that type of thing. The New York group, did it have much interaction with what was going on at the Gesell Institute?
Aside from the fact that the Gesell people would come down to the optometric center, and they would sometimes send their, quote, interns down to the optometric center. No, there wasn't that much. It's an interesting question. Yeah. But there really wasn't that much interaction between the...
You're both in very close proximity there.
Yeah. I mean, Straff and Appel, whenever they gave a lecture, I was there. In Connecticut, or they did give lectures down in Manhattan.
So now you're at the school. The school is getting going. Tell me about the courses you taught and what you were involved with in the clinics, and what some of your responsibilities were over the various years.
It changed tremendously over time. When I came on, I was coordinator of teaching in vision therapy. And my job was to go ahead, this is the very beginning, to coordinate the clinic with the didactic part. And I worked at doing that. And don't forget too, I think we had 25 students.
Yeah.
So it was beautiful.
Yeah, that was the first year. I was in the third class. We had 39.
Yeah.
So it was still fantastic.
Still beautiful.
Yeah.
Knew everybody's name.
Yeah.
And knew exactly who everybody was. Okay, I did that, and I was always in the clinic, okay? At times with Marty, too, again, Marty continued Thursday.
Yeah.
And I would try to get into clinic, and I usually could. And the courses I started teaching were the courses in developmental vision,
Yes.
whatever that was, okay? And that was interesting because the history of that was in the days when there was no college, just the optometric center, there were programs that we had third year, well, rising seniors,
Okay. Right.
particularly from PCO, particularly, and as time went on, it grew.
I remember this is the summer intern program.
Summer intern.
Yes.
And these people would come, eventually they came from Europe
Yes.
into that program.
While I was there, somebody who, like Guy Nagels
Yeah,
From-
Nagel, sure.
Yeah.
from Belgium.
Belgium, yep.
And we started a friendship there. We actually took some courses together while I was there, and that started a very long exchange. And he and I have been in touch with this next upcoming International Congress of Behavioral Optometry. And that started back when he was one of those summer interns.
And so there was that program, and that went along. That was extremely successful. There were other programs. There were Cubans, exiles, who came to the United States, optometrists. They wanted to get there was a program to get them their New York State licenses.
Mm-hmm.
And there was that was a program where we didactic and clinical. And so these things were coming along, but what happened, we had this developmental vision clinic. And the developmental vision clinic, we had a sort of a thing that was put together all over the place. There was a thing called the Red Schoolhouse Study.
Okay.
And it was a terrible study. We didn't know what.
Right.
We were not
Researchers.
We didn't know statistics. But there was somehow, and I don't remember exactly, but Mickey Weinstein. So Mickey went ahead and he said, well, we're going to go into the schoolhouse and we're going to try these tests. And I don't know where he got the tests, but it was like angels in the snow, alternate hopping, walking on a walking rail.
I can tell you where he got those.
That's from the Gazelle Institute.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Some of them.
Some of them, right.
Some.
Right.
And the form board, the circus puzzle,
That's the
the
Gazelle.
peg board,
Yes.
and
My father learned those. He went to the Gazelle Institute.
I didn't know he went there.
Yeah, and he took some of those very early courses, and that's when he came back with the form boards and the circus puzzle and angels in the snow on the floor and the all of these different types of things, the hopping and that was a testing routine taught at the Gazelle Institute.
And what they did, they didn't till later on have actual statistics on it.
Right.
But what Mickey wanted to do was say, hey, how is it, and we got a little bit of something. I was given eventually that course to teach. And what I said was, you got to put this together into something. And that was like, you could tell my life story in some of the publications.
You bring up the evolution of the different publications that you've had and this type of thing. As a throwback, I'll share with you, I still have my class notes from the class that I took with you, and there are still things from there that absolutely I teach from and use in the courses that I teach at Southern College of Optometry. Some of the things of the Piaget and the right-left test. And
But that's a whole other, that goes along with. But what I did was I had to teach it. And what I said was, well, okay, I'm going to put it together. And so I think the publication, if I can remember, I think the title is Visual visual spatial development in the child, and optometric, clinical and theoretical. You had the book.
Yes.
You learned, and what I did was the first part laid the groundwork.
Yes.
And essentially it was that, hey, vision is something, again, this world out there. How does it happen? And I went back and there were all these people whose names I forgot who published and I stole from, but nobody knew.
Right.
But no, I did give many of the people credit. And this was the concept, I think it was Kephart, who talked about the invariant.
Yeah, you absolutely had Kephart in those materials.
And it was that this, yourself.
Newell Kephart.
Newell Kephart, very good.
Right.
You did learn.
Yeah.
And what it started that way, but you have to have this self-awareness. And what I said, okay, and then I took this theoretical construct and said, okay, what happens is you have body knowledge and control. That's number one. And I traced a little bit development, how that happens.
And Irwin, in a way, you said the last 15 years of your active career at SUNY was so devoted to working with traumatic brain injury, acquired brain injury, and all of that you taught in that development course was precisely what we use now when we're working with our traumatic brain injury. Because, and Morty Davis, he talks about the developmental milestones, and then on the way down, he talks about trip stones, okay, getting in the way and coming back down. And what we see is development coming back down at those same levels. So all of those things that you taught and provided for us on the way up absolutely helps us looking at when function has been disrupted.
Exactly. And what happened was they said this, that once that happens, the human development, there's a self-lateralization. And people say laterality. Laterality is a phase toward self-lateralization. It's when the child, when you see like in some of those tests, that the child is using both hands and then uses one or the other and eventually comes down to pretty much using the same hand in most tests. Right. And why is that important? And you get to the spatial development of, there's up and down, but the left and right. Okay. And so that was like very important. But I got hooked on child development a lot. You said, how did you get into Piaget? So I started looking, I took a course, I forget where it was, and it was an introduction to Piaget, and I said, oh, wow, this is really good stuff. Because what Piaget did, he talked about child development as it's really cognitive development. And essentially, okay, this left-right concept, he talked about it, but then I read a book by two Canadians called Pinard and Lauren Dow, who really took this left-right concept and spatial development, Piaget's, and did it elegantly. And I think I was the first one to take the Piaget test, and the way they did it and did the statistics on it was absolutely marvelous. Right. And I took it and went ahead and taught it that way at the college, and a lot in terms of continuing professional education. I had stuff that I did I looked at my CV the other day, and so I did a lot of lectures around the country on, reversals, and that was the left, right, that kind of thing.
And the way you taught that test to me at SUNY is precisely how we at OEP have been teaching it in the clinical curriculum. And it was very interesting just recently at SCO to run across another version of the Piaget right-left test. And I was like, why is this one different? This is so weird. And I kept right back to my notes from you. I was like, here's the source. And then it turns out that the two authors you mentioned, they extracted and did something from Piaget. You go directly back to how Piaget did it, and it was slightly different. I still actually like the way you presented it from those other two authors. It's actually more streamlined and makes a little more sense in the labeling of the stages, but it's just very interesting. I want you to know that by passing it on, it in all your education, but as well, that's pretty much, I think, the way it's out there is the way you taught it in that very beginning part.
And so, you know, to say, it said the things my publication showed my life.
Yeah.
And essentially after that, what happened was we had this battery of tests that was really teaching, and they were good. And I said, but we got to get into a more cognitive type of way to look at these things. Well, the Piaget, left, right, and that was one part. But then one day, Harold Solon, and he could be a nudge, but a wonderful nudge. When he wanted to get something done, you know, he came to me, he said, look, and I was very often, he would give me something he was going to publish and say, please read it over, edit it. And I did. And he said, the Academy asked me to do something on statistics. He said, I'm going to do a series on it. I said, okay. He said, would you read it? I said, yeah. So I read it. I said, what the hell are you trying to say? I said, Harold's so damn brilliant. He said, well, here's what and we're talking basic stuff right now on statistics. And I said, well, why did you say it like that? And Harold said, well, okay, you write it. Go ahead. And he said, we'll be co-authors. Well, what happened was, turned out, didn't want statistics. We wanted tests and measurements.
Right.
And that's when we started getting into, and Harold was doing, you know, he went ahead with the Birch-Belmont test and really brought it into optometry. He and Sid Brofman, Shelley Moslin, did a whole lot of things with standardizing a number of the tests, okay? And essentially, what happened was, he was sort of teaching those things, which I was incorporating. But as I learned tests and measurements from Harold. I really didn't know it before, but doing it every week, he would bring something, and I would say, and he'd say, okay, go ahead. And I'd say, again, what are you trying to say? And we'd flesh it out, and that became tests and measurements through.
I can see the green book on my bookshelf.
No, the other, no, it's not green.
It's not the green one.
The other, that's the one that he did with Sid.
Okay.
It's the green one. This said, I think, tan or something. I have it. So then, I mean, that was really great because that was like really impacted the profession.
It did, absolutely.
People from all over the colleges would say, thank God you did this. Boy, we understand standard scores, scale scores. You did it in such a nice way. And optometrists, you know, when I was teaching the course, they had to read that book.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to wind forward a little bit now. I know at SUNY you had a huge hand, maybe the hand, in getting residencies started there. Talk to me a little bit about residencies, and I'd like our listeners to know that, or people watching this, that my understanding is they actually have named the residency, or that one of them at least after you at this point as an honor.
That's why people think I'm dead. It's true. I mean, I met some of the residents at COVD, I think 2 years ago, and they came up to me and they said, you're Suchoff? I said, yeah. I thought you were dead because they named it. Well, here's what happened, essentially. You had this, well, we started early, you had these summer internship programs. And then there was one program that if you had been in the program as you were a rising senior, you could come back the next year, and there was a developmental vision, quote, residency, which was like 3 months, I think. And so we were doing that, and I was teaching a lot in that particular thing. And that took up time in the sense that it was past the summer, went into the fall. But one day, what I did was, I became boss of that particular program. And what happened was I would have faculty members come in and give a discussion to the group on Friday. And so I had Al Lewis, who became the president of New England
at one point.
And he said to me, you're really running a good show here. He said, have you ever thought about going ahead and extending it? because he said you got these people went for one summer and then they came back and they're ready for something more.
Yeah.
He said, wow, yeah. So I went to Norman Hafner and talked to Al and talked to a number of other people at the college at the time. And everybody agreed it was a good idea. And I went to Norman and said, Norman, I'd like to start a 1-year residency. He said, absolutely, let's do it. Well, it was the days when money was flowing.
Yes, I remember those days.
New York State, you did whatever you want.
Yeah.
And educationally, it was really great. And I said, okay, he said, and you do it for 4 people. I said, 4? Yeah. And so essentially what happened was, there's a little argument about it, okay? But I think we were the first year-long residents.
Mm-hmm.
The VA in Alabama, I think, they started their first program, I think around the same time. They were the first accredited. We were the second accredited in the country. So, yeah, so we did that, and I was, that took up a lot of my time, except for the crazy time when I was dean for the professional program.
Right.
I was continually director of that, supervisor of that program. Yeah. As we added more and more residencies,
Right.
we needed a director of residencies, which I became. At the same time, it was happening in Alabama, and John Amos and I found each other because he was doing the same kind of thing at Alabama, and we didn't want to reinvent the wheel, so we shared a tremendous amount of things that we were doing. Like, for instance, residents had to write a paper, and we developed something between the two of us that we used at both places, and so that went on. My career took another turn in another direction at that point. As residencies came about, they wanted to be accredited.
Yeah.
I was called upon because of my expertise, as John was, in residencies. I mean, expertise. We were the only shows in town.
Right.
So we were the big experts. And so what said that, they called the accreditation council would call on me. Would you come along and be a member of the team to accredit residencies? Then it went from residencies to going into institutional.
Right.
Yep. And so what happened was that went along very nicely, and then the profession decided that they needed to add another person on the accreditation council to represent residents. And they asked me to do it. And again, too, what happened was it was very time consuming.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful thing to be on. I've been blessed with being on certain things in this profession, like, wow, the luckiest guy in the world. Yeah. That was one of the things, Accreditation Council. You worked with dedicated people who gave of themselves unbelievably. And I remember this, that before one of the meetings, and Gloria will remember, I would get a stack like this.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And the stack was, before the meeting, there were 4 a year, you would have to read every report, and it was taken up at the meeting. And, you just did that. But it was a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful experience.
So you mentioned that residents had to do some writing, and I think that's sort of a perfect lead-in to something that you had a profound effect on. And I don't know how it came about precisely. The OEP for many years had these chapters that would come out, one set a month, and they would mail these out, and all these things would be in these 12 separate pieces, and some would write for 2 years or 3 years. And then there was the creation of the Journal of Behavioral Optometry, and you were its initial founding editor. I'd like you to talk about where did the idea come from? How did you get involved? What was the vision? How did this whole thing happen?
I'll go back. I always loved to write. I mean, I was writing in college. I was published in a magazine, I think, called Argosy or something like that while I was in college. A short story, that kind of stuff. And at one point, I thought I wanted to become a writer. And then what happened was there was a publication called Optometry Times. Not the same one that's now.
I know.
This one was Harcourt Brace Jovanovich. They were the publishers, and they were publishing Pediatric Times and Rheumatology Times. We were the last ones. They came to us, came to the college somehow, and they asked me would I be editor. And I had a staff of professional writers. And I would say to them, okay, call Dr. Jones.
Right.
He's lecturing on this, and here's what you should need to find out. These were professionals. They would then go, and this was a newspaper type of publication format. And they would write the stories. I would then edit the stories, and we would get these things out. It was very different type of thing, okay? Well, it came to an end. They went into difficult times, and
that's the next time, right? Optometry times, difficult. No,
difficult times, right? And we were the last, and we were the first out. And that was okay, you know. That was time consuming, but I've always enjoyed the things I do. And so then Baxter Swarthall and Bob Williams, at one point, I guess it was, I don't remember what year it was, whatever.
Yeah.
And they said, listen, we have these papers that no one's reading anymore. That people, the papers, the OEP papers, were good when you had these meetings, study groups, and they were the cement for the study groups. But somehow study groups were falling out of favor. The world was getting too complicated. People couldn't take a evening off and, you know, read and all that and then discuss it. That wasn't happening. We like to do a journal. And I said I was interested. And we went upstate. Bob came in from California, and we went upstate New York to Baxter's cabin, which was cold. Well, yeah, but he had a cabin. And we did this in like February, and it was cold. And Bob was not in good shape.
No.
But we decided, we're going to go ahead and publish this journal. And it came at just the right time. It was, I think, a very important thing for optometry. COVD had been publishing a journal, and it was of one type, and I identified it that what we needed was something we had a different mission than the journal that COVD was publishing, and we had a different audience, and we had a different mission from the Academy Journal, from the Journal of the AOA, and from the COVD Journal. And it was the right thing at the right time. And so I did it for a long time. I did it for 17 years.
Can you explain a little bit about how that mission was different? Because I do remember the kind of author, the way you work with the author.
You gave it a name. Different. What did you call it? You don't remember? Developmental editing.
Yes, absolutely.
What I decided was the usual model. It still is, you know, in some journals, is that you go ahead and you get the articles, and the editor looks at them and says, well, it's okay, you know, it's got potential, and you send it to someone else. And someone else goes ahead and three else, okay? And what I decided to do was, because I really enjoyed writing, and I liked helping people write. And like I said, I did it with Harold. And what I did was, instead of sending it out to my review board, I would, and you know, you went through it with me.
Yep, absolutely.
We'd go through, and I'd say, okay, here's what, you know, I'm going to edit it now. And I'd put all kinds of things in. And what happened was, by the time my reviewers got it, it was in pretty good shape.
Yeah. I do remember such a change in the process, and I won't say anything. Obviously, I worked with Sid Groffman fairly closely in a number of articles that went into the Journal of Optometric Vision Development, and then I started working with you on a few, and I was like, whoa, this is a very different process. But you've left a legacy of some marvelous writers who I think would never have found their voice had it not been for your developmental editing. And I can think of two offhand, Steve Gallup and Eric Hussey. Neither of those two would probably have ever found a way to get their ideas out of print. And I just pass along a heartfelt thank you to you for that kind of work. I'm doing that now for OAP not in a journal way, but in another. And I know how difficult it can be to help those people find their voice. And that's a special talent that you have, Irwin. And I just thank you for what you've done with that to help some of these people, again, get their optometric message out there and have them have a chance at helping to shape the profession.
Yeah, and thank you, and thank you. What's interesting is, after I stopped being editor of Journal of Behavioral Optometry, Paul Freeman called, as I recall, and said, "Okay, you're coming on," and I came on, and I think for about 6 or 7 years, until its untimely and stupid demise.
On to optometry.
What
was a journal at that point, the Journal of American Optometric Association.
Or optometry.
Right. Then changed its name to optometry.
But it was a very different experience.
Right.
And what he did was, he would say to me, what I would do when I got it, I would start editing it like I did for the Journal of Behavioral Optometry. No, Paul and I, worked well together. So he knew, he appreciated it. And then if he wanted to kill something, if he wanted to kill it and wanted to do it in a good way, in a constructive way, I would raise things that the author just said, like, no, I'm not going to do that. Mm-hmm. Okay? And it may sound like a mean thing to do, but in the world of publishing, you have to develop these types of things because it's terrible to go ahead and string somebody along. I mean, you can go ahead and just say, no, this is not worthy of publication. I think what Paul liked to do and I like to do would be to show the person that if they really wanted to get published, they really had to start the process over. They really had to look into it. What I found is most people didn't have a plan. And it showed. And the other thing too, if they had statistics, you get a statistician to go ahead and do it, okay? It was all these kind of things. And it's interesting, too, that the thing about residents having to go ahead and write something, that was wonderful. I taught a course in writing, and I did it even after retirement for many years at SUNY. They would import me, and I'd go over this thing, how to write. Right.
Well, you remember one year at the COVD, you and Greg Kitchener worked together, and we actually put on a 2-day course about writing, and how to improve writing. I think that was tremendous. I'd like to move now to, you were involved in certification and accreditation with ACOE, but you also got very involved in the COVD fellowship process. And I think and you're still involved in that at this point. And you have left and will leave your mark there in a very positive way. I'd like you to talk a little bit about your involvement with the COVD fellowship process.
It's interesting because Alan Cohn and I were lecturing at COVD, I think for about 6 years. We gave the course in head trauma, of the 2-day courses, the applied concept courses. And then that came to an end. And I figured, okay, I'm retired. Maybe I'm really retiring this time. And then came to me, forgot who it was, and said, oh, was it, I think it might have been WC.
Maybe even Len Press at that point, too.
Well, no, Len wasn't chair. WC was chair. I think it might have been WC. And said, would you come on? And said, yeah, tell me what I got to do. And so I came on, and people coming on, you have to find your way as a reviewer. You have to really understand that it's not your way or the highway, but as long as the person can express themselves, say what they're doing, why they're doing it, and if it makes sense, that's fine. And again, too, like with these types of things, like ACO, you with wonderful people on these kinds of things because they're dedicated, they're knowledgeable, there's no egos. Right. And if there is, that doesn't last very long. Right. And so I came on and was on, you can serve 2-3-year terms. Well, what happened is before my 6th year, I was asked to be chair, and that would make it a year longer. And it's at this point, this is my last year. In October, I will step down as chair, having served 3 years in that capacity, and leave it, and say, wow. Where do I go from here? Probably nowhere. Okay, probably nowhere. It's,
There's probably another opportunity around a corner somewhere. Somebody will come and tap you on the shoulder.
But it's been a wonderful experience. The years that I've been on, WC was chair, I think, for 1 year. Celia Hinrichs was on for another 3 years, and as chair, and just wonderful. The group, we've changed the process. We've made it definitely clearer on what's required. We've done rewrites of the manuals, the certification guides, any number of times. Yeah. And we've changed the questions. Yeah. We've changed the case reports. We've done a job, really good job, and you've been part of it on the multiple choice exam, where I called meetings at SCO with people where we've developed questions. And so it's been a wonderful experience. Yeah. And, I feel it's been just extremely worthwhile.
Irwin, I'd like to thank you for, again, inviting us into your home, spending some time talking. I'd like one final thing. I want you to imagine you're speaking now to a new group of students just entering the profession. I'd like you to talk to them, as you've talked to so many people over the years, about what you've loved about this profession and what message you hope they will carry on into the future.
I think I'd say this, that I'm so pleased that I chose optometry. It's been a wonderful life in terms of both private practice and organizational and institutional optometry. When I was the admissions committee, and you say to people, why do you want to become an optometrist? And the stock answer, I want to help humanity. And you can do it in very interesting ways. And of course, from the time you came in, and when I came in, Helmholtz was my buddy. It's changed so drastically, so unbelievably. The thing to do is, I think, to think that you're going to really take care of your patient's total visual process. It's not going to end. It's not going to end like it's coming in here. Right. It's not going to end at the occipital lobe. No. That's very important about this input process, and that has to be good. Because garbage in, garbage out. Right. Has to be good coming in. But what happens is, what happens beyond it? What do you do with what you're seeing? How do you process the information? So I'd say to students, keep your mind open. Understand, not everybody likes to do vision therapy. Vision therapy, once you get into this vision therapy complex, it's not the same thing. You're going to, you'll see a glaucoma patient once every 3 months, 4 months, and you'll see most other patients once a year, usually. You become part of your patient's life when you in vision therapy. It doesn't end when you go home. It's with kids, you're going to go ahead and you're part of the family. You get to know the teachers. You're communicating with the other professionals who are involved in terms of what's happening in terms of head trauma, where binocular problems and visual information processing problems are unbelievable. But what you're going to be able to do is you're going to be able to go beyond refraction, go beyond treatment of pathology, and get into this binocular vision, visual information processing world where you can really change people's lives.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.